Dessel was a human male born on a Patros over 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. He was raised by an abusive drunk of a father and lived his early years as a miner and debtor for his family's past. At the age of 23, Dessel left the mines and took a position in the Sith army. When he was recognized as a Force sensitive, he was discharged from his battalion and began training as a Dark Lord, now taking the name Bane. After spending time in the archives and learning from the writings of the ancient Sith, Bane became disillusioned to the current Sith regime, the Brotherhood of Darkness, and fashioned for himself a new Sith order consisting of only two, a master and an apprentice, one to embody the power, the other to crave it. To ensure this plan worked, Bane unleashed a weapon that eliminated all other Sith in the galaxy. He then launched a new order with his solo apprentice, Darth Zana. The two stayed in hiding for the next couple decades, only occasionally running into a Jedi to fight. As much as they both wanted to bring down the Republic, they were warriors at heart. Neither of them possessed the skill set required, and all they could do was pass their knowledge to the next generation and hope for the best. Eventually, after Bane had taught Zana all he knew, she killed him and assumed the mantle of Dark Lord herself. Bane was remembered as the one true Sith Ari, the Overlord of Prophecy, who purged the Sith and made a line of Dark Lords stronger than ever before. The Sith remained in hiding for over 1,000 years. In time, they made their presence known to the Republic, and the new Jedi were quickly forced to pick up the torch and fight. Obi Wan Kenobi was a human male born in 57 BBY, either on Coruscant or Stujon, depending on your sources. Kenobi was taken by the Jedi Order at a young age, and trained by Master Yoda as a youngling. As a teenager, he became apprenticed to Qui-Gon Jinn, until Jinn's death at the hands of the Sith apprentice Darth Maul. Now being brought to knighthood, Kenobi became the master of Anakin Skywalker, a role he was hardly prepared for. He did the best he could, acting as a brother to young Skywalker when what was clearly needed was a father figure. Still, they both grew into extremely powerful Jedi, and Kenobi himself ultimately took a seat on the High Jedi Council. When the Clone Wars hit, all the Jedi were shoehorned into military roles, which they had not truly experienced since the fall of the Army of Light 1,000 years prior. Kenobi became a High General, and one of the few Jedi to regularly face the Sith on the battlefield. It all came crashing down at the end of the war when the Great Jedi Purge took place, and Kenobi became one of the few survivors. He had to face down his old apprentice, now Darth Vader, and defeat him in a climactic duel above the lava lakes of Mustafar. Kenobi then spent the rest of his life hiding in the desert, keeping watch over Anakin's son, Luke. Mere days before the fated Battle of Yavin, Kenobi faced his apprentice one last time and fell by the hands of his long-lost friend. Obi Wan Kenobi was remembered as one of the greatest Jedi in history, and his influence expanded long beyond his death. I got the idea for this matchup by way of thematic parallels between the two. Many people call Darth Malgus the Qui-Gon Jinn of the Sith Order, in that he is a maverick who does what is best for the Force and said let everything else be damned. But in that same vein, I would say that Bane is a very good parallel to Kenobi's character. Like Anakin, he has a natural talent who had a lot of his power handed to him easy. Hey Ray, take notes! This is how you write the fast learner archetype correctly. He has actual struggles that go with his character. He's a highly intelligent fighter who values the principles of what the Order stands for above all else. He and Kenobi both fought to preserve what they believed was best for their religious values, but went in completely different directions on how to solve the problem. Even so, they ended up at the same basic end conclusion: sacrifice themselves for the greater good and let the next generation handle it from there. Also, in some ways, they are indirectly responsible for the destruction of everything the other sought to build. It was Bane's line of apprentices that brought the Republic down and made the Jedi go extinct, and it was Kenobi's line of apprentices that brought the Empire down and made the Sith go extinct. So, may I present the purists of their orders. 2 decades in the mines and receiving abuse from a father molded Bane into a weapon of war long before his time as a Sith. He stood well over 2 meters tall and was already described as a mountain of muscle long before he served either the military or the Brotherhood. In his time at the Academy, he fought on an even playing field with Blade Master Kasim, and the two were described as striking each other 6 times in the span of 2 heartbeats. When he hit his prime, he was able to tear through Durasteel with his bare hands, and moved fast enough to block rain from hitting him. Think about it, he's standing outside in pouring rain, reacting to and intercepting each individual raindrop with his lightsaber as it comes down, and only gets hit once in the entire 10-minute session. Most impressively for physical prowess was Bane's tolerance for pain. Not only could he wear the Orbalisk armor, which feeds on the user's body and constantly tears into their flesh while wearing it, he could also take hits from Xana's dark side tendrils when she was boosted by the Nexus, one of which eventually seared his arm off completely. The one downside to Bane's physique is his dark side degradation. Years and years of serving the dark side caused his body to decay, resulting in pale skin, yellow eyes, and a small tremor in his limbs. Still, Bane is an absolute monster to deal with, forged by the flames of war into a juggernaut. Obi Wan Kenobi seemed like a meek and unassuming specimen, not even 2 meters tall and possessing a relatively slim build. But if the human body is a temple, his would be like the one King Solomon built. He was trained from birth to be a fighter and a peacekeeper, and his true mettle was shown during his time on the front lines of the Clone Wars. He was physically strong enough to break Savage Opress's legs by hitting him in the kneecap, tear through Grievous's duranium plating with his bare hands, and knock Anakin on his back by bowling him over. His speed is such that he could defend over 21 strikes a second from Grievous without relying on the Force to cover him. His reaction time has been compared to sublight or even down to a nanosecond. His greatest attribute, however, is his durability, and I would compare him to Indiana Jones or even Prince Zuko in this regard. He survived crashing a ship from orbit, been tortured in a prison camp for months, and had spells of madness attacking his mind for several weeks before even starting to feel their effects. No matter how many times he's beaten down, he always finds a way to get back up and hit harder. Pound for pound, blow for blow, you would think that Bane has a significant physical advantage, but the two are far more comparable than you'd think. Kenobi has ripped duranium, which is much stronger and more durable than Durasteel, giving him a significant strength advantage over Bane. Alternatively, Obi-Wan's months of physical torture don't compare to Bane's years of it, either under the effects of the armor or during his time as a miner. Bane's raindrop reaction and Kenobi's nanosecond feat, I assume, are relatively close. I'm no scientist or anything. Though at one point Kenobi did move fast enough that even Dooku thought he had vanished from physical sight, so that is a good sign of him being comparable, if not superior to Bane. The only thing that really settles this question for me is the fact that Bane is a decade older and his body has already begun the degrading process, implying that his physical skill may not be completely what it was at his best. With that, I give the slight edge to Obi-Wan. Bane was a bit of a unique case in his Force abilities, in that much of the knowledge he possesses is second-hand. He initially learned the basics of the Force from his instructors at the Academy, but at a certain point he started learning most of it from the library and the writings of the ancient Sith Lords. After an incident in which he seemingly lost his connection to the dark side, he started getting private tutoring from his fellow acolyte Githany. She would learn the techniques from the masters, and then pass the knowledge on to him after the fact. Even with this limitation, his natural ability for the Force moved him much quicker on the road to success than his peers. Within an hour of learning how to channel Force lightning, he was creating storms of it strong enough to legitimately terrify Githany and cause a disturbance in the school itself. But his true final teacher was through the Sith holocrons. Each one of these contained the memories and the wisdom of the Dark Lords of the long past. With these, he was able to study under the tutelage of Darth Revan, Freda Nad, Bilia Darzu, and Darth Andadu. From these, he amassed knowledge of hundreds of ancient spells and magics, such as the Thought Bomb that wiped out all other Sith in the galaxy. His telepathic abilities were advanced, and he could use beast control to bring down a Rancor and ride it like a common pony. Gee, if only someone had bothered to show Luke how to do that. I mean, it's not like Kenobi or Yoda haven't gone against this kind of thing before. I digress. His aforementioned lightning was powerful enough to tear through the defenses of Jedi and burn the flesh off of his enemies in seconds. Like any other Sith, Bane is able to feed off of the fear of people around him, gaining strength by slaughtering the weak. His senses are also highly attuned in the Force, and within a tenth of a second, he was able to see every enemy around him through the Force. His Force repulse was enough to shatter Jedi's Force walls and even collapse a temple on top of him. Farfalla described him as a force of nature, one that he could only hope to contend with through an amp of battle meditation. But Bane's final and most deadly ability was Essence Transfer. This ability was so powerful that it immediately destroyed the physical vessel of the person who attempted to use it. This was the Sith's go-to method for cheating death, forcibly removing your own soul from your body and moving it into another person. At the end of his life, a small piece of his consciousness was placed into the body of Darth Zana, and he lived on as a small voice in the back of her head, proving that he was worthy of his title as Sith Ari. Initially, Kenobi was considered to be weaker in the Force, as his connection to it seemed to be lesser than his peers. But this only pushed him to work harder, and within time, it allowed him to surpass said peers by practice skill. Kenobi used his power in a similar vein to John Constantine in DC Comics. He was incredibly crafty with both his battlefield tactics and his use of the Force, channeling his abilities to undermine superior strength by a subtle touch. As he himself put it, a fight is never a goal in itself. Sometimes it is simply a distraction from the true goal, and best countered with a larger distraction. If you remember Vader using all the objects around him to his advantage and hurling them at his enemies, also remember where he learned that trick in the first place. Wasn't Sidious, I'll tell you that. He was also capable of using the Force to manipulate machines and cybernetics. Lightsabers seemed to be above his pay grade, but he was able to use it to affect both Grievous and Anakin's cybernetic hands and make them drop their blades. Aside from these small tricks, however, all that hard work gave Kenobi an immense magnitude with his abilities and a great versatility at that. He was an advanced student of Tudominus, energy absorption, and was capable of directing both fire and blaster bolts with his hands. Another lesser-known power of his was immovability. The idea behind this is that the user plants himself into the ground like a tree to weather any attack. It was rare that he chose to go on the offensive, but when he did, it was incredible. A single Force repulse from him was strong enough to absolutely destroy the bounty hunter Dirge and tear his entire body apart into tiny pieces. And more impressively, his Force push was a dead equal to Anakin Skywalker, the boy whose raw power was supposed to only be matched by Yoda and Palpatine. And as we discussed last week, Kenobi may or may not have been fighting against an amped Anakin in this scenario. Kenobi's greatest weapon, though, was his attunement to the power of the living Force. As instructed of him by Qui-Gon Jinn, Kenobi was able to let go of the material plane and give himself over completely to its power, allowing himself to be one with it. It is said that on the day he brought down General Grievous, this was the power that guided his hand and delivered him through without a single scratch. And in the end, when everything else was gone, Kenobi transcended the physical plane, allowing himself to live on as a Force spirit. This round is the closest of the group in my opinion. In a straight contest, the two each have their advantages and disadvantages. Kenobi's telekinetic shoves are stronger than Bane's. We know this because he's matched people of a higher caliber. However, Bane holds the edge in his repulses and greater destructive potential, as we've seen him cause more chaos when he's gone on the offensive. The thing that decides this round for me is which one can dish out more damage to the other in a straight contest. When pressed against the lightning of the reigning Sith Lords of his own day, Obi Wan relies on his lightsaber to take the hit, implying that even he recognizes that it is above his ability to absorb. Kenobi isn't likely going to fall victim to essence transfer. That I will give you. But at the end of the day, his tricks are only going to keep him in the fight so long. And frankly, considering how many times Obi-Wan has gotten his force wall broken, I question whether even his immovability is going to hold out against a hit from someone like Bane. Thus, I give the Dark Lord a slight edge in force abilities. Bane was a textbook perfect duelist, crafted by his studies of technique and form. He put the most effort into a specialization of Gem So, which focused on counterattacks. But he also wanted to keep his options flexible, so he also focused on Surisu, which emphasized defense, and Juyo, which focuses on attacks. More on Surisu when we get to Kenobi. Gem So is the fifth form of lightsaber combat. It requires its user to leverage their own strength to redirect opposing strikes and pressure an enemy into slipping up. Juyo is the seventh form of lightsaber combat, and banned by the Jedi Order for bringing its users too close to the dark side. Juyo utilizes an aggressive onslaught of randomized attacks to overwhelm and decimate an enemy's defenses. Bane was also a master of Dunmak, a technique meant to undermine the opponent through psychological warfare. The best example of this is in his battle with Serac. The first time they fought, very early on in his career, the Zabrak warrior absolutely annihilated him and left him within an inch of his life to humiliate him further. Second time around, after extensive training with Blade Master Kasim, Bane feigned a clumsy opening so Serac would underestimate him again, and then proceeded to tear him apart and humiliate him in front of every other student in the same way he had done to break his spirit. By the end of this time period, Bane was able to go on an equal footing with Kasim, and nearly took him down in a serious fight. Here though, it is revealed that Bane had an Achilles heel engineered into him by his teacher. He had absolutely no idea how to deal with dual blades. But this certainly didn't hold him back much longer. He and Zana were able to deal with a strike team of battle meditation boosted Jedi, led by Farfalla, the man who picked up the Army of Light in the absence of Lord Hoth. In his final battle with Zatanna. In his final battles with Zana, Bane quickly disarmed the girl, and she could only win by relying on her force abilities. If circumstances had been different, there is a good chance he would still come out on top and defeat his apprentice in a duel, which kind of undermines the whole point of the rule of two, because each one is supposed to be stronger than their master, but it's fine. As a student of Qui-Gon Jinn, Kenobi got his start as a practitioner in an altered form of Ataru. Ataru was the fourth form of lightsaber combat. It mostly relied on fast blade work with a lot of physical combat to speed blitz an opponent. It, like Nyman, had a connection to Jarkai dual blade fencing, which Kenobi also held high proficiency in, though he rarely ever picked up a second blade at all. But by the end of the war, Kenobi's claim to fame was his skill in the third form, Surisu. Surisu was originally designed solely for blast deflection, but over time it became the purest expression of Jedi philosophy itself. And according to Mace Windu, Obi-Wan was not just a master of it, but the definitive master, and the best that the Order had ever seen with it. According to Nick Gillard, choreographer of the prequels, Obi-Wan is a tier 8 swordsman, just under the level of Yoda and Sidious as a duelist. And while adaptations vary on how he compares to the other great swordsmen of his day, this lines up extremely well with his other performances. He fought Anakin to a standstill, took down Ventress without a lightsaber, and took out Maul and Savage by fending the pair off single-handedly and exploiting a weak spot in their guard. I will say that legends and canon have radically different ideas about what Grievous was like, thus his confrontations with both versions are radically different. While I am trying to marry both adaptations of legends and canon as best I can to bring the best possible analysis, I, like many others, treat the two versions of Grievous as separate characters. But that analysis is for a completely different day. Overall, Kenobi is an underrated swordsman and deserves a bit more credit. Even into his old age, when he was far past his prime as a swordsman, he was still more than a match for the likes of Darth Krayt, Darth Vader, and possibly the Dark Star Killer, depending on whether you want to consider the alternate timeline as a valid source. This is kind of an odd verdict to decide, and it's mostly because of the type of characters each person took down in their own day. Bane knows the sequences of Surisu inside out. He's a master himself, and he taught it to his apprentice. Kenobi knows the sequences of Gem So inside out, not only teaching Anakin, but sparring with him so many times that he doesn't even think about defending against the attacks in their final duel. Another thing that is odd about this match to me is that, well, we've never actually seen Bane go up against a Jedi or Sith so close to his own level. Sure, there was Kassim when he was like 20-something, but we have no idea how he'll react or what he'll do now when he's presented with an equal. And yeah, I do consider him and Kenobi to be on a relative playing field in pure skill. The two deciding factors for me are experience and the ability to adapt. Obi-Wan was out on the fields day in and day out learning how to contend with a lot of different threats. Bane tries to do that, but he only ever gets one major sparring partner at a time. The other big problem I see him running into is the fact that Kenobi's tactics and sequences are slightly off-book. And we all know what happens to Bane when he finds something new he hasn't studied before. That being said, in a tough contest, I give the martial edge to Obi-Wan. I talked quite a bit at the beginning of this video about how both characters are parallels on their respective sides, but that's about where it ends in similarities. Bane wanted to rule the weak, Kenobi wanted to lift them up. Bane wanted to break the Force and make it adhere to his whim. Obi-Wan spent his life giving into it and listening to what it commanded him to do. Bane is geared toward offense, Obi-Wan is geared toward defense, and both try to counterbalance these ideas with the opposite tactic as well. A quintessential Sith and a quintessential Jedi. So, who comes out on top? Well, first off, the pair are both highly intelligent and philosophical fellows. Given the right circumstances, I genuinely believe that they would first want to sit down and have a conversation about the Force. Like, if there were no battle lines drawn and no threat to dismantle, the two of them might just chill out at a bar and have like a deep discussion about why they think their respective order is better. After that, though, they both know that they can't let the other walk. So to set up this fight, let's say that it takes place in the Tatooine desert. The advantage to the victor is going to be a 7 to 10. A fight begins with a heated lightsaber duel, and both combatants trying to test the other's skill level to figure out whether they're over their head or not. They'll trade blows, maybe add a few punches or kicks along the way, and stand their ground as very much equals. If Bane is going to win, I think his best strategy is to try and end it early with some strong Force abilities. But this is what Kenobi is meant to do. He takes hits, he dishes them out hard after the opponent has worn themselves down. And since Bane is already starting to degrade, eventually, he will tire himself out and wind down. He might even make a mistake in his sword guard when he's trying to figure out what it is that Kenobi's doing. Once he knows it's over, he will likely draw on his essence transfer, turning his body to dust and trying to latch himself onto the enemy, which fails. Since his spirit has nowhere to go, it immediately dissipates and fades away into obscurity. I declare Obi-Wan Kenobi the victor. Of course, this is all just my opinion. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section down below, as well as any suggestions you'd like me to cover in the future. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.